Okay, this is reviewing graphing trig functions for sine and cosine. I think this is part 4. So we did 3 examples, 3 more examples, and I'm hoping to get through the last 3. So again, I'm going to kind of go through all of the information at once, and then we'll graph separately. The amplitude, I'm actually going to change one of these problems. Let's make this a negative 1/2, so we can throw a negative in there. So the amplitude is the absolute value of 1 on this one, which is 1. This one is the absolute value of negative 1/2. And this one is the absolute value of 2. Okay. And then what did we do next? The phase shift. So phase shift is where you are going to take this entire inside piece, that inside piece, and set it equal to 0. So phase shift, we're going to take x over 2 minus 5 pi 6 equals 0. So I'm going to add that over and multiply both sides by 2. So I'm moving right 5 pi thirds on that one. On this one, we take 3x equal to 0, divide by 3, x is 0, so I don't really have a phase shift. On this one, x over 4 plus 3 pi fourths equals 0, subtract that over, and multiply by 4. So we're going to be moving backwards pi thirds, or 3 pi. Okay, and then the mean line, I have nothing here, a 1 here, and a negative 2 here. And then period. Here's the thing. This is really written as 1/2 x because the x just gets multiplied in. So that b value is the 1/2. So we take 2 pi divided by 1/2, multiply by the reciprocal is 4 pi. So on this one, there's that 3 there, so 2 pi divided by 3. And this one, there's a 1/4 here, so that's going to turn into 8 pi. Okay, and then our x scale, this just tells us, I'm actually going to show you how to do it without the x scale first. Okay, so basically, I need to make sure to include an entire period, and so 4 pi is pretty big. So I'm going to say this is 4 pi, 2 pi, pi, 3 pi, negative pi. But then I also have a shift of something in terms of thirds. So I'm going to make third marks. So pi thirds, 2 pi thirds, 3 pi thirds. So I just have that cut into thirds. Okay, so the mean line is 0. The amplitude is 1. And then if I were to graph this without the phase shift, because this is sine, it would start at 0 and at 4 pi, halfway between. So if we go back to our main function, start and end halfway between it's at 0, halfway between those two it's at the top, halfway between these two it's at the bottom. So this is what it would look like, or those 5 dots. So I've got one at 0, then we go up, middle, bottom, and then at 4 pi. It's kind of hard to see, but I intended it that way. With this one though, we are shifting to the right 5 pi thirds. So I have to move 5 pi thirds. 1, 2, 3 pi thirds, 4, 5 pi thirds. So this dot gets moved to the right 5. Now, I can notice the kind of step from here. I'm going a distance of pi, which with the current marks, it's 3 lines. So I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3. That's where it's at the top. You could also count from this point and go right 5. But I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to continue that backwards. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, something like that. Okay, that is your function. Now, if I had done the x scale for this one, so we take the period and divide that by 4, and that gives us a distance of pi. I just counted on the graph rather than actually working it out, but that distance is still pi, because 3, 1, 2, 3, I'm in thirds, so each mark is a pi third, so 3 of them is pi. So it still works out the same way. So if we were to graph this one, so sine of x over 2 minus 5 pi over 6, and then that was everything. So that's what it's going to look like, keeping in mind that I believe that this is only going to 2 pi. So maybe a little bit more. As you can see, where it's crossing and then going back down and then going back up, it's stopping, so maybe about right there. So a little bit past 2 pi. So, and then it's going off the graph on this direction. If I go to the window, I can actually see where it's going. So it is going a little bit past 2 pi. If I were to input negative pi here, and we'll do 4 pi here, and I believe that's pi halves. Well, let's make it pi thirds. Then it should, and we can change this to be negative. We'll do negative 2 to 2. This will make it so this graph looks more like our graph. So you can see the lines like that. And that would work as well. Okay. So then this next one, the period is 2 pi thirds, and there's no phase shift. So let's just do, I don't know, 2 pi, pi third marks. The midline is 1, so this is being moved up 1. The amplitude is 1/2. So that means that I want, there's 2, I want halfway above that and halfway below that. And then So the period means that for its cosine starts at the top, halfway between, it's at the bottom, halfway. So the period, this needs to complete a full cycle at 2 pi thirds. So in 2 little marks, it needs to complete a full cycle. So from there to there. Except this has a negative in front. Now what that's going to do is going to flip this upside down. So now at the top, instead of the top, it's going to be at the bottom. So this one also gets moved to the bottom. Halfway between that, it would have been at the bottom, but it gets flipped to the top. And then halfway between that, it's at the middle. Now those don't actually have little marks there, so I'm going to include them. Okay, and then I'm just going to continue that pattern. So it's stepping every mark because I had to throw in some extra ones. So this one's going to be up, up, middle, down, middle, up, middle, down, going backwards, middle, up, middle, down, middle, up. So something like that. Again, if you did the X scale, you would get that distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is pi 6. Okay, and then the last one. This one is going to be very long because we need to go 8 pi. Okay, and I am going to throw marks in here for each one is pi. Okay, so the mean line, we are actually down 2. One, 2. And then the amplitude is 2. So up. So our maximum is now going to be on the x-axis and 2 below that. We have a phase shift, but I'm going to put some dots for this 8 pi, the period without the phase shift. So this is sine. It starts in the middle, ends in the middle, is at the middle, in the middle, and then up and down. But then we also have to include moving this backwards pi thirds. So each line we made pi, so 1, 2 off the graph. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I could also just continue the pattern. So every 2 marks, I have a new thing. So 1, 2 puts me down there. 1, 2, it's the middle. I can also notice that I'm also, my middle ones are just kind of forward ones. So there's going to be a mark here. And then halfway between that, it's going to be at the top. Or I can still count 1, 2. So it's doing something like this. Okay. I used the wrong color, but you get the idea. So the domain on all of them is all real numbers. The range is what's going to be different. So on this one, the maximum and the minimum, -1 to 1. This one, the minimum is 1/2, and it goes all the way to 1.5. And then on this one, so we've got -2 here, so that's -4 is my minimum, and 0 is the maximum. Oh, you can't see part of that. There you go. So that is how you graph sine and cosine. I'm going to go over tangent and the reciprocals. This gives you kind of the base for how the transformations work, these transformations are applied to the other ones as well, just the same way.